Hi, welcome, Ruel.
Thank you, Deborah. It's good to be here.
It's nice to have you here. So early in the week, right? I know you're a busy man, so I'm glad that you took time from your life.
It's an honor to be here. What a blessing.
I would love to have you introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Ruel Haymond. I grew up on the East Coast in the Washington, D.C. area. Connections to Thailand, where I was born during the Vietnam War in 1968. Raised in a large family. Eventually made my way to Utah to go to school. Served a mission for my church in Chile, so I speak Spanish. And
nice.
Anytime I have an opportunity to practice my Spanish or be in a Spanish-speaking country, I'm a very happy person.
Qué bueno.
Qué bueno, sí. And basically, I'm married with 7 children, 4 grandchildren, and I teach for my primary living. And then I run a small charity called El Humanitarian that takes humanitarian trips around the world. And so we've done work in Peru, Guatemala, Samoa, Africa, Nepal, and hopefully many more in the future. So my heart and my mind is really in feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, liberating the captive, educating the ignorant, comforting the lonely, spreading beauty, preaching truth, healing the sick, on and on and on. So I know that's an interest of yours too, and so
that's how we get
together
along.
we can do great things for sure. But it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to have a conversation with a microphone and a camera, right? We're always talking. We're taking our COVID test this morning so we can get to Guatemala on Saturday.
Right,
so we've done a lot of really fun adventures. And one of the things I wanted to bring up today is this is the month that we're talking about peace.
Right.
And our piece of that piece, if that makes sense. So on the first episode this month, we talked about self and how it is up to us to seek out that peace, to be proactive, to do the things that get you to that place,
right.
To connect with the divine, to be a peacemaker. We have also talked about how that peace is reflected in families last week. Because in the circles that we're talking about, starting with self and then family, is really the next circle where there's a lot of influence. There can be a lot of conflict.
Right.
And then the third circle, even though it will be community and a little bit like that, we're just going to make it simple and create that big circle, the world. And that's why you're here, because you've traveled so much and you know so much about history and also have the passion, like you said, to expand your influence to help the world flourish. So one of the projects that we have in common is through Sustainable Families.
Right.
Yeah, you helped create this book, which is called Family Capital and the SDGs, which means the Sustainable Development Goals. And the subtitle is Implementing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals Through the Family. We both agree that family is capital.
Right.
And although there's conflict in family, we could find and we can find ways to have the family be an asset to society.
Right. It's the most important level of government next to self-government.
Yes. So you wrote the chapter 16 on peace and justice.
Right.
I would really love to have you tell me about about this thing. What do you mean by the family is the first level of government, and how does that apply to the world at large?
Right. Well, I thought it was interesting when you started off talking about we have to be connected to the divine. There are a couple of ways to connect to the divine, and that is connecting to the divine and then connecting to each other as brothers and sisters. So from a Christian, using Christian language, loving God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and then loving your neighbor as yourself. And I think it has to start with that whole concept of I cannot love myself without first loving God and knowing He loves me, or the divine. And once I know how to love myself, I'm in a better position. And in fact, I can get to the best position of actually loving and serving those around me. Right. There's a certain level of knowing who we are before we can actually really lift and build and help people in that way.
Right.
So anyway.
No, I like that. We have had several conversations about your love of books. I think that's another love that we share. I'm a huge nerd, and you're a huge nerd too. We both bathe, though. And I even wear makeup, so we're good.
Right, for sure.
But I sometimes like to refer to you as the book doctor, because you mentioned something once that I thought was really deep. I mean, you mentioned lots of deep things, but
Right.
one of the things that I really liked, that everything that we need to know has already been written by somebody. Right. Tell us about that.
Well, years ago I read a book by Sterling W. Sill called The Majesty of Books, and in it he gives commentary on a variety of different types of books that are his favorites, why books, great literature is useful in society, yesterday, today, and forever kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But he talked about a doctor living in Alabama, this would be probably in the early 70s, who often, instead of prescribing drugs or things that would affect the physical body because of illness and so forth, he would prescribe books. Because he realized much of the ailment of his patients came from emotional and spiritual sickness. Mm-hmm. And so I've loved that concept of what books can do for a nation. One of my favorite stories in literature is the narrative on the life of Frederick Douglass. And here he is a slave in the 1820s, 1830s. He eventually escapes in about 1845. But it was when he discovered that reading and writing were the paths from slavery to freedom. And I remember being a part of a university study years ago where we were trying to teach troubled youth, kids that had real bad attitudes, struggled in just simple, basic social skills. These were middle school students primarily. And I was a part of a team that was supposed to go in there and teach them how to behave, reward them when they were good, not reward them when they were bad, intermittent reinforcement, all these different techniques. And I remember watching all of this and thinking to myself, these young people lack knowledge.
Yeah.
They don't understand who they are. They don't understand the world in which they live. They don't understand what history says about them, what history says about their future. And I remember talking to the Dean of Education and finally getting to the point where he actually said, maybe you're right. Maybe we need to read books with them. Instead of teaching them skills, teach them how to think, teach them the lessons of human nature and human history.
Principles.
Give them principles so they can actually guide and govern their own lives. And it was a very powerful moment when I saw that these were the quote unquote worst of the worst in the school. And all it took was a little bit of patience and giving them knowledge that was interesting to them, that was relevant to them. And it changed their world and it changed mine. So we very much underestimate the power of reading and reading great books. We live in a world of electronic junkies. Yes. We work with 3 to 5 minute videos
wasters.
now. We just to sit down for 2 or 3 hours with a book and think through and annotate and ponder lessons in history that seems so foreign in our day, and yet it's frankly still the key to much of the happiness anyone will experience in this world.
Right, I like that. So talking about peace, one of the conversations that I had with my children actually in the last episode about family and peace, our equation was gratitude and love equal peace in a family setting, and also creating a team environment.
Right.
And knowing that you have responsibility over this.
Right.
So I hear you talk about love and something else in order to achieve peace. What is that?
Well, yeah, I remember this quote by Abraham Lincoln, when I do good, I feel good.
Huh.
When I do bad, I feel bad. So we're living in a world right now where lots of young people and older people are a little bit confused on what is good and what is bad. Mm-hmm. And so we have to start with the premise that there are absolute rights and are absolute wrongs. That's something that it's very it's not popular to speak that way.
Right.
So even in the concept of love cannot exist outside of law, good law, meaning laws that govern the universe, laws that govern human behavior, laws that govern finances, laws that govern morality, laws that govern, the physical nature of things from, physics and chemistry and so forth. You have to have law in love, and you have to have love in law. If you separate them, then you get two sides of a real bad situation. Too much love or just love leads to breakdown of moral society, leads to anarchy. If it's just law, then it's a totalitarianism, it's tyranny, it's very brutal. And so there's a balance there. And so we have to, one of the beauties of reading from great books and reading from the past, not just living on the modern diet of current thinking, because current thinking has separated so much, particularly in the moral sphere, law from love and love from law.
Yeah, even in a marriage kind of situation.
Very much so. And the raising of children and so forth. Right. We all understand that you can't if you just love your children, you end up being their friends, and that's not what they really need right now. They need parents who uphold law with love. Yeah. The friendship that will come, when they're independent and governing themselves.
We just had that very conversation with Patrick last week. Yeah. He was saying, I'm not that I liked you when I was a teenager.
Exactly.
But now that I am 20 and I lived in Russia and I've gone through a lot more, I recognize that.
Oh, Mom, you are amazing. Dad, I had no idea you were so intelligent.
Yeah, I just got really smart really fast. But it's the idea of the law. So
exactly.
there are rules, there are limits.
There has to be.
Yeah.
That we live in a world where rights are proclaimed from the rooftops. We want rights for this, rights for that, rights in this, rights in that. And yet without responsibility, again, balancing out the rights. I have the right to do this. Well, actually, there's a responsibility that comes with that as well.
Right.
And, I remember years ago, a friend of mine, she was a mother of about 13 children. And at the time I had an 18-year-old son who was getting he was a little bit too big for his britches. And I remember she said to me, 18-year-old boys can be the most difficult human beings to be around because they want all of the rights of adulthood with no responsibility attached to it. And that's just human nature. And so the challenge is if we have an entire society that wants all the rights of adulthood with no responsibility, then we get what we get today. And we get the anger, the bitterness, the screaming, the yelling, the confusion, the depression, lack of peace. There is no peace. Yes. There is protection in law. Yeah. Because a good law, true law, real law, absolute law is bound and filled with love.
Plus, I think it provides stability. So I study family science, as you know, and psychology. And I think children, and I know we're adults, right? But we're still children. There's a world here that has to be governed.
We need to remain like children because that makes us curious and excited to learn and continue, and for sure.
Yeah, because children need limits. They need boundaries. They need bedtimes. They need meals. They need. But we somehow think, we somehow think, we're adults now. We don't need any of that, which is not true. Psychologically, we need a stability.
And if we violate those laws of just of good living, from eating right to bedtime, there are consequences for that. Right. There are consequences for that. And yeah. Anyway, I remember there's a really one of my favorite books is called Fiat Money, Inflation in France. Wow. And it's written by a man named Dr. Andrew White, and he was a president of Cornell University. He was an ambassador to Germany at one point, but he wrote this book about how the destruction of the money in France played a big role in the decline, in the French Revolution, and ultimately all the challenges that came with that with Napoleon and so forth. But then in the preface of the book, a man named John Mackay talks about how we live in a world that wants, we are okay with laws governing the physical world. Right. Speed, velocity, gravity, right? But we don't really understand very well the laws that govern economics, the laws that govern money, the inflation, deflation, and even less than that, do we understand the laws that govern morality?
Oh yeah.
And he said basically, legislatures, voting, parliaments, Congress, popular vote, popular opinion cannot abrogate, meaning cannot repeal, cannot abolish that these laws exist. And the sooner children learn that in the family setting, the greater protection they will have and the greater peace will be theirs as they stumble and bumble and ultimately succeed in this life.
Yeah, you're a great parent. Your children are amazing. We just had Amen. Is he your oldest?
He's my oldest son.
And yes, because I know your daughter just had a baby. And
She
didn't
did.
you help in the birth? Because your wife is a doula and all that?
In this one, I was taking care of the other 3 children while the 4th one was born.
You were relegated to babysitting.
Yeah.
Amen came with us to Guatemala, and just wonderful kid. Wonderful kid.
Yep.
So there are some themes that I heard you speak about. Relativism. Sorry, my accent gets in the way.
Yeah.
But also, I've heard you talk about, there's a couple of things I want to make sure I don't miss, because I wish I could be here with you for like 3 hours, and maybe we'll get something even started to touch the surface of the idea of the world and its relationship to peace. Not necessarily just the world as in the planet, but the world around us. And our worlds are very different from each other. You know that.
The cultures that are around us and the countries and
the laws, the institutions. So relativism is a problem, because the reason I think that I'm from Guatemala, as you know, the reason that America works so well is because it's the rule of law, right?
Right.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Because your name is Ruel.
Yeah. There's only one rule in my house.
Yeah. And so the rule of law allows us to have it be a just world, and there's justice involved.
Right.
And I love that even in our own constitution there is mercy too.
There is.
The justice and mercy have to coexist, just like love and law.
They do. Hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And if you remove mercy, then we are in big trouble. And if there's no justice, again, pick your poison: anarchy or totalitarianism.
Which are
both are brutal.
Terrible.
In fact, anarchy always leads back to totalitarianism or tyranny or a very brutal, cruel, unkind society.
Yeah. So we've talked in our conversations all over. We've gone to several countries together with our teams to develop, to develop the people into a more free society in the sense of freedom from the bondage of hunger,
right,
and other things. We talked about the will, and we also talked about one of your favorite books that my children, when we went to Guatemala last year, they absolutely loved it, To End All Wars.
Right.
So I want to make sure that those 2 things we get to talk about today. And I love to have you back. You're so entertaining.
For sure.
But tell me about either of those 2 or both.
Well, in a nutshell, there's actually another book that I like to use when we talk about the will, and it's a book called The Mainspring of Human Progress by Henry Grady Weaver. He wrote it in 1947, and there's a quite a little bit of a history behind the book, but ultimately it starts out with, for 6,000 years, the vast majority of human beings have lived in poverty, caves, riding horses,
slavery,
chariots, slavery.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, in one spot on the earth, which in this case would be America, you see these technological scientific advances like nowhere else that we really know of, that we have really accurate records on, and so forth. And the focus goes back to why is this? Is it because other people are not as intelligent as the people that in America are? They and I realize we live in a world today where it's popular to really beat up America, but if you really do your homework, we had an amazing start. And again, and one of the most amazing parts of our own history, our own heritage, is people understood they had a will.
And they also lived as very good, solid families.
They did.
I think
Families were strong, but individuals understood they had a will. And in this book, one of the great tragedies of this world is I would say the majority of human beings that have ever lived on this planet did not know they had a will. They didn't know they had a choice. Right.
So it's nothing to do with intelligence.
No, they just did not know. They did not know they could dream.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Like that story in Guatemala.
They could not know they could dream. Exactly. And so, but then you go to the To End All Wars. The beauty of it, To End All Wars, is it's a prisoner of war camp in Thailand during World War II, and the prisoners come from all over the world, and what they discover is, in spite of walking around in loincloths and having amoebic dysentery and tropical ulcers and diphtheria where they couldn't swallow and they couldn't walk, and ultimately men were dying like flies. They came to understand that even in the midst of all of that pain and suffering, with the change of attitude, with the understanding that they had a will and they had a choice, they literally lift themselves out of this, what we'd say, internal poverty. The poverty around them was real. The starvation, the lack of food, the lack of nutrients, the lack of bananas and eggs for protein and so forth, those were limited. But they changed their minds from a death style mentality to life. And what I love about the book is it teaches you that faith, hope, and charity are much more life-sustaining. Much more life-sustaining than food, clothing, and shelter.
Oh, I think that's going to be the quote for this show.
Man,
For this
that
episode,
book, I'm telling you,
Faith,
Ernest
Hope, and
Gordon
Charity.
is the author, so you get the right one. But
Yeah.
it is one of the greatest books ever written.
Faith, hope, and charity. Repeat that again. I think that's
That
beautiful.
faith, hope, and charity are more life-sustaining than food, clothing, and shelter.
Love it.
And in a world of fear that seems to prevail nowadays in so many ways,
Yeah.
that book, the principles taught in books like that, and that's the beauty of it. It isn't just that book, but you have to be willing to sacrifice time and quote unquote pleasure to find these nuggets, these gems, these gold mines of knowledge and understanding that would literally transform your life.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's fun that we have read such different books from each other. And they teach the same principles.
Very
Like,
much so.
I'm
Truth
in the
is
middle-
truth.
Yes. I'm
Happiness
in
is
the middle
happiness.
I'm reading Man's Search for Meaning for the third time.
Right.
Frankl.
Right.
I mean, what a story.
Powerful.
What an opportunity for somebody that had already studied the mind
Right.
to experience
one of
it.
the points he makes in there is, and it's something that's so contrary to our world today. We live in a world where if you're big and strong, big muscles, good looking, you can tackle the world and everything is fine. According to Viktor Frankl, those were the men that died first.
Yes.
Because again, it's not about the external. It's
Yes.
the internal. If 60% of poverty, according to my dear African friend Percy Gogoa, is inside the person.
And that again, I love the idea of internal poverty. And that's what leads to death. So we had a conversation with somebody in Guatemala. I don't remember the name of this man, but he was talking about that the idea of not dreaming anymore and what changed his outlook in life.
You mean
dream.
Juan?
Yeah. Tell us that story. I
Well,
really love that.
this is a friend of ours, Greg Jensen, who started Cultiva International, and he talks about how he had met a fellow in his church congregation who was a well-respected Guatemalan. Asked him, what he did for a living. Kind of got an idea that he wasn't too content in his current situation, and basically asked the question, so what do you dream about, Juan? What do you really want to do? And he said, I don't really want to answer that question. He kind of poo-pooed the question and hesitated, and eventually he said, I don't dream.
Yeah.
Because I know that if I dream, I'll be disappointed. There's no way I can ever fulfill my dreams. And so again, Greg pushed him and said, what do you really want to do? Well, if you could dream, and he said, I'd like to have land to grow my own food. I want to be able to provide for myself and my family.
Yeah.
He had a great knack for growing things, but he just did not have the courage. He had been what's the word? He had come up against so many obstacles throughout his life that he really did not understand that he really still had a will, and that dreams could still come true. Yeah. So Greg worked with him, taught him some things, and before you know it, he's producing food on his land. He's seeing, oh my goodness, all he needed was a little bit of a nudge. Yes. He didn't want anyone to do it for him.
And he's teaching other people.
And now he's teaching hundreds, if not thousands of people how to grow their own food, fulfilling his dream and helping to feed the hungry.
Okay, so one of the really great definitions that I remember from last summer when I took my children to Guatemala and you had a bunch of kids, we were doing this project, with Cultiva that you referred to, was the definition of poverty. They found it fascinating. I found it fascinating. What was that?
Right. Well, again, I'll attribute it to Cultiva and what they teach there. But back in 2000, the World Bank produced a 3-volume set called Voices of the Poor.
That you read, right?
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, I went through them. So much of it was data and research, but I went through the stories. I went through the countries. Same concerns worldwide. Same pain, same suffering, same hunger. It's actually quite a depressing set of volumes. It really doesn't give you much hope. And but from that, Cultiva would teach us that, look, if you ask an American what poverty is, they will say, well, lack of food, lack of clean water, lack of money, lack of resources.
Like an iPhone.
Excuse me. Like an iPhone. And but when you ask somebody in poverty what poverty is, they would say shame, embarrassment, hopelessness, and despair. Wow. And so too often in our humanitarian work, we think by going and giving them things, even doing it for them, and even sometimes doing it with them, is the way to change them. But somehow you've got to change the internal. I remember when my first trip to Guatemala, we were working with an orphanage in a beautiful, beautiful area, traveled up to visit about 90 moms, and we had clothing, children's clothing. We had baby formula that we were distributing. This was the orphanage was working with the local government there in Guatemala in providing these resources to these women. Yeah. Only a few of us spoke Spanish, and these women were told, there was a computer where you're allowed to have this many articles of clothing, and this much formula, and this many diapers. Diapers and formula were fine, but when it came to the clothing, they became almost animalistic in grabbing, and there were women in the line that were saying, "That's not fair. We're being good. They're grabbing more than they should." It got out of control. I saw this. I saw this in Africa too. Yeah. And again, what it was is we were coming and we were handing things to people, and they were saying, "That's all." I remember in my son, for his Eagle project, we were in Mexico, and he had these beautiful donated backpacks, top of the line backpacks filled with things like combs and brushes and toothpaste. And I remember when we were handing them out to families in need, one mother bowed her head and started to cry because she said, "We can't even afford to buy toothpaste, and this is such a gift," or a toothbrush. Another mother said, "I don't like the color," or "Can we have two?" And you're thinking to yourself, okay, something's not working here. So there's so much in this idea of we have to help solve the internal poverty before people will choose to pull themselves out of external poverty.
Because it's not up to us to pull anybody in.
It isn't. We want them to be independent. We don't want them they're not our slaves.
Right.
They're not our dependents.
There's no colonialism. There's no paternalism.
Nope.
This is lifting each other up because
that's the goal. Because they can.
Yeah.
And because they have a will, even if they don't know it.
Yeah.
The goal, what you and I are working to do, and with many other great people, is to teach every human being that we come in contact with. Yeah. You have a choice. You have a will. And you can think and you can act. I'm here to help you, but I will not do it for you.
So it's interesting you bring that up because it came up in the family and peace last week, and it's about. I love this quote from Covey that he talks about. There's a space between stimulus and response, right? So we do have a will, we do have a choice, and sometimes the choices are not the best, and maybe they're all gray, but at least we know that we have that.
But the challenge is in our world today. I remember sitting at a university, a very, very well-known university, sitting in a room filled with college professors and a dean, and we were again talking about how to deal with troubled youth. And someone wrote on the board stimulus response, and basically here's the stimulus, here's the response.
You were Pavlov's dog.
And I remember thinking, someone better say something here. Finally, the dean said, "Wait. There's a choice in the middle." But we live in a world where the default setting, frankly, is Pavlov's dogs. We like to be the ones to save everyone. We want to come in and make sure everyone's happy, and we want to be the ones that give them what they need at just the right moment. No.
You have your will.
There's a level of happiness and peace that can only be had when people choose for themselves, then they're successful. Think of your children when they learn how to put their clothing on by themselves. They learn how to do things by themselves. They are so excited.
Yes.
We have to keep that excitement up.
And they can maintain the gratitude that will bring
Exactly.
the love and the peace and the connection. So one last thought. I traveled 12 countries last year. You travel a whole bunch too. And we have a worldwide audience. There are lots of friends that we have all over the world. Right. And I was talking to a friend of mine that has a PhD in conflict, worldwide conflict resolution kind of thing. Very wise, written wonderful work in extremism and what that does to the world. And she said to me, the word peace is not something that people can relate to because they have never felt it. No. So we had a conversation about this, you and me, that the idea of peace is not external. It's not whether or not there are battles going on, which there are, starvation going on in Guatemala,
there is.
All kinds of different conflict. So just for our last part, if you'd be willing to, how do you see us as an individual, as a family, as a citizen of the world? How do we preserve that peace, even if it is not as ideal as we would like it to be?
You mean around us, our circumstances?
Around us, because, like I said, it's easy for an American to say, oh yeah, you can feel peace. You can feel peace because life is easy, and it kind of is in America, but not everywhere.
Again, where much is given, much is required. And so if all is well in our worlds, then it ultimately, in both cases, whether you're an American or whether you are, a peasant or someone struggling to feed their family in Nepal or Samoa or in Guatemala,
or Middle East,
both people, it's that relationship with the divine. It's that relationship with God, a God, whatever that means to you. And that relationship with God, with the divine, fills us with so much love and desire that we cannot rest unless we are out lifting our brothers and sisters to become just as we are. This is where the golden rule comes in. Wonderful, many rabbis, many wise people throughout history have said the golden rule is the law. Everything else is commentary. And so when you're looking at, if I am somebody with many resources and I have air conditioning and I have enough food to build strong bodies and I have libraries in my house and on my computer, shelves of books for knowledge and so forth, if I am connected to the divine, truly, then I will not be happy unless everyone I come in contact with that will allow me to feels my love and feels God's love or the divine love.
So you're, in a way, expanding from the self to the family.
That's how it works.
The circle of influence expands because your heart is expanded.
It's got to be here. It starts here. It starts here, and it fills you so much. That peace that you have, that connection that you have, that understanding that you have, that recognition that I have a will and I have a choice and dreams can be realities. I have an obligation. It's not even an obligation. It's a privilege to go out and to lift everyone around me. Again, only if they allow me to. I can't go and force it on them. But most people, when given a chance, if they're presented with truth or error, they're going to choose truth. Yeah. And if we are filled with it and we've experienced it, because again, truth, it brings peace, just like love and law. Anyway, we will go out and make a difference in the world.
Thank you so much. I wanted to mention this book. It's one of my favorites. I'm sure you own it.
Yes, it's a wonderful one.
I memorized it by now.
No.
And it's The Anatomy of Peace. And it brings a lot of that, what you're saying. Even in war, how do we find that balance of connecting to the divine and giving to the people around us? Because that is the ultimate feeling of joy for me, is to extend an arm of charity, not as in, I'm going to give you stuff, but more like a pure love. A pure love with no strings attached.
No strings attached at all.
Yeah. So we're hoping that this summer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Going to Guatemala again.
For
My
sure.
children are counting on it, and I
For
hope
sure.
we have a lot of people that want to go, assuming
Yeah.
that the COVID restrictions are up and all that.
Sure.
But there's a lot that we can learn from the people that suffer every day.
Yep.
And I think we as Americans, having lived in both worlds, grew up in a developing country, we have a lot of internal poverty, much more than people out there that are connected to divine just to survive.
Sometimes even more so here.
Yeah, because life becomes kind of shallow.
Yeah.
But I'll quote my favorite song about peace again, because I won't sing it. You could probably sing it. You're a great singer. But let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
Yep.
So thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
your
It's a
time.
pleasure.
Yeah, we'll see you again.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We really love listening to Ruel and his wonderful insight, our book doctor. Please connect with us again if you want to learn more. Visit @peacetoday.com.